Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the studio visit. The studio visit was founded by Isabel Manello, and it is a way to document artists, artists in all forms, scholars, writers, visual artists. And what we decided as of 2020, not because of the pandemic, but because of the way of the world, and particularly in the United States, that we were only going to document artists, brown and Black artists, because they need to be documented. Today, we have a very, very special guest, hailing all the way from Paris, France. And I may not pronounce her name correctly, but I hope so. Her name is Francois Verge. And I'm so excited that she accepted our invitation, and I'm honored. Francois, how are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing,
It's been, as you know, a tough time, but at least there is sun outside, so
and we
it's
are
all right.
live, Francois. We can breathe.
Yeah, we are. Yeah,
So my
yeah.
first question, I have so many things to ask you, because you have such a rich background and you've done so many things and you've made such huge contributions. When did you start writing?
Oh, well, okay. I have loved writing for a long time. I like to write. Even when I was at school, that was the only class in which I was like a good student, to write and to write little fiction, But otherwise, I started quite early. In fact, at 16, I was writing even, article I remember in the anti-colonial newspaper. I
Okay.
mean, very small testimonies, but something.
How many books have you written? You're being
Oh,
humble. How many books have you published?
oh, a few, a few, a few. But
Okay,
it's my contribution. It's this is what I can do.
it is
So
very serious and very important because those writings will exist, for eternity. And that's critical because people seem to forget about things so easily. You studied Arabic and Chinese in Paris, but you finally chose journalism as a career path, which was a big change. Why did you make that decision?
activism, in fact, just activism. I started to effectively, I wanted to learn Arabic and Chinese. I didn't want to live in Europe. Europe, I was not interested so much in Europe. So these two languages were for me at the time. I was very young. The possibility of going to live somewhere else, to choose either the Middle East or Asia. I mean, China, of course. And then, well, this was French university, so I was, quite easily discouraged. And there was activism. And so quite quickly, I gave all my time to activism. And then I started to write, and I became a professional journalist with, a journalist's card and everything. But so I wrote for activist journals, but also for feminist journals. I mean, different, different uh, newspapers. So, and it was something I had thought of doing also when I was young, but, it was not really planned. It was, okay, activism, you have to testify, you have to write, you have to say something. So,
Well, I know this wasn't one of my questions, but I think it's important for the audience. Tell us about your mother and father and where you came from.
well, my father, his mother was Vietnamese from Vietnam, and his father was from Réunion Island. And my mother was French, and she was born in France. And the two, from two sides, is quite interesting. On the side of my father, the fact that my grandfather married uh, this Vietnamese woman and recognized the two children he had with her, my father and my uncle. It was, I mean, the colonial society started to really mobilize and wrote, I found that in the colonial archive, wrote letters of protest and saying that because he was a French citizen from being from Réunion, that he could not represent France with, and marrying, a woman, a local woman. Because as men, you could live with them, they could serve you as, but not getting married and not being recognized. So he was a doctor, and the governor took away his credential. So
But
that was so.
your dad was a prominent activist. That's where you get
And
that
my
from.
father became, so he went back to Réunion Island. He had been away, my grandfather had been away for 30 years, and himself started to be involved quite early in activism and creation of different federations, the Federation of Workers in Réunion. And then my father was effectively quite early an activist himself. At 16, he volunteered to go to fight against Nazism. And then he joined the anti-colonial communism and came back in Réunion with my mother, whom I had met in France, and then started a long career, I will not say career because it's give like a sense of, establishment. Yes, he was an activist all his life. Really all his life. He was a very active. I grew up in that environment with my mother also being a feminist and an activist. I grew up learning about the ANC and the struggle against apartheid. That was close to us. This was, school was the French education, whiteness and everything. And at home, I was receiving another education about the world.
Here. We have to.
Yeah.
We have to.
So for instance, Cheryl, in my bedroom as a child, I had a poster of the Black Panther.
I believe it.
Yeah.
We had to. I mean, that was the only way we were going to know our history, our connectedness. Okay, they weren't going to teach it to us in those schools.
Yeah, so this little girl from Réunion Island, she had a poster of the Black Panther beside, some other. So because recently I found a photo, a picture of my room, my bedroom as a child, and I say, oh my God.
Yeah, my dad, I grew up in Miami, and my dad had me, I was 6 years old. And so we would go to the migrant farms in Homestead to register people to vote because they couldn't read or write. He said, this is your job. I mean, that's how you raised, that's who you are. Tell me, why did you move to the United States in 1983?
Oh, that was a series against, it's like serendipity. I mean, my life has been a lot of, turning that were not really planned. France was becoming quite, boring, and activism was very slow, and I could not find. So it was in 83. And I was, in fact, I came to the United States at first to bring an old lady, to accompany an old lady to California, to South California. And I stayed 14 years. But at the beginning, I was supposed to stay a week, to just drop this woman and going back to France. And I stayed 14 years. My experience was first as small jobs, mowing the lawn, cooking, being some kind of, maid, and doing a lot of things, secretary for French people. And then after I decided that for 2 years, I was totally exploited. And it was a very interesting experience, but I was in San Diego. So the kind of hysteria about, the people coming from Central America and South America was already starting. This was 96, already starting. And about the wall, building a wall. So it was really, really already very, racist, of course, and it was Reagan in power. And so I was illegal. I did not have paper. I was illegal, and I was hearing constantly about, illegal people being deported. So I decided, so I had been 2 years in, as I say, small jobs. So I decided to leave, to re-enter legally, because I did not want to go back to France. So I lived in Mexico for a while, the time I got my papers as, like legal person with my paper. So I lived in Mexico for 8 months, waiting, for my papers, going to the US consulate every 2 days. It was also a very interesting experience, of the racism at the border.
Right.
Yeah, very,
and it's still the same. First of all, it's the same. Unfortunately, nothing has changed. But
Nothing
tell
has
me
changed.
about your education at UCLA. We
So I was first in San Diego, and in fact, so when I arrived, I mean, when I was no longer 20-year-old, and I have been an activist for a long time and a feminist and writing. So I decided to do women's studies, a BA in women's studies and political science, to do two BA, to do it in 2 years, to do them in 2 years,
Oh my
and
God.
to look for summa cum laude. So then I could apply to good university for my PhD. I mean, that was the plan. That was the
Okay.
plan. So,
Okay. That was your
you know,
strategy.
you know. So I did it. I got my double BA in 2 years with
Oh,
summa cum laude. So I could apply to a good school, afterwards for my PhD, because then it was really like a turning moment in my life, one of many, one
your
of many
PhD was in political science, right?
in political theory, yes, in political theory at Berkeley.
Okay.
And I wrote about the French colonialism and the way in which the fabrication of consent to its racist ideology, how this works, how
Okay.
this work, and
Okay.
how people,
Okay.
I talk about the resistance of Maroon, the Maroon, the
The
enslaved,
Maroons.
yeah,
The Maroons.
and about also then about anti-colonial resistance. And I think I was able to do that because it was not in France. I don't think in France I would have done a PhD, because it would
Okay.
have been too, I mean, I suppose the French people would have constantly asked me to justify myself.
Right. 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 Right.
So there was some freedom of writing in English and so on. So I got my PhD in 95.
So you
At
are
Berkeley.
also a decolonial feminist. What is that? What inspired you to become a feminist?
Well, I say, I grew up in a feminist house. There was like no way. I mean, I had two brothers, and there was like no way. There was no difference made between girls and boys. All of us had to do, the same work, and to clean the place, and to contribute. And also, we were very encouraged by my parents to do everything, to be very free. And also, I saw my father encouraging my mother constantly to do things, to not to stay. And my mother was not a woman at home. Not that there is anything against women at home, but she was not. And also, she was not a traditional person. She did not. She did not. She did not like to cook. She did not like to
That was
sew.
my mom.
She did not, okay, she did not like to knit. I never saw my mother in some kind of
My
traditional.
grandmother taught me those things. My mother was a businesswoman. She was a pharmacist. She didn't have
Yeah,
any. She said, I'm not domesticated.
at all. Like I learned. In fact, I learned cooking with my father, who was a
Okay.
very
My
good
father
cook.
could cook too.
So you see, that's a very common situation.
Okay. So
Not very common, but
this
it's
is
okay.
the last little piece about your scholarship because they need to know the other side of you about your curatorial practice. But I want to talk about the wombs of women. The
From which,
wombs of women, race, capital, feminism. So this was a republished book in English, right?
yes.
So tell us about this book. It's very important, and I think it culminates your work, your life work.
Yeah, and it's also I think it speaks to so many women around the world, to so many non-white women around the world, right? It started with something happening in Réunion in the mid-70s, of learning of thousands of forced abortion and sterilization. And from that, I was interested about the fact that, white men, it was performed by white men, white doctors, why they felt entitled to do that, what gave them the entitlement to do that, like incredibly, like, performing this brutal act on the body of racialized women and poor women. And also, and the way of considering these bodies, some of the women were pregnant, like 6 months old, pregnant, 7 months of pregnant. It was terrible, and they were not warned. They did not know, so they woke up, and with being having lost their child, and some of them being sterilized without knowing it. So they understood it, but when they wanted to become pregnant again after that they could not become pregnant. So I was interested in that, and also how this was connected with the new vision of imperialism and capitalism after World War II, that people in the third world were having too many children. Non-white women were making too many children, and that was threatening the world, the free world, what was called the free world, and that it has to stop. So the intervention at the local level, but also at the global level of all these men deciding, who had the right to have children and who did not have the right to have children. White women were encouraged to have children, and non-white women were in fact forbidden to have children. So it led me also to look back at slavery, under slavery, and how reproduction of the enslaved population was managed differently in the US or in the French and British and French colony. And this I talk about, the fact of the extractivist economy was not just about mining and land, but about also the womb of woman. That the womb of Black woman was a capital, of course, but also was a mine, if I may say so, of extraction of life, from white supremacy. And that life was then circulated again, trafficked again as an enslaved person throughout. So that it was very important, because quite often it was not included, that form of extractivism was not included in the story of enslavement. There was a lot of talk about cotton and sugar and coffee, and of course the punishment and the brutality, but not the fact that the womb of woman, and not only the womb of woman in the plantation, but in Africa. Because I was saying that if you have deported millions of Africans, all of them had a mother, all of them were born of a woman, a woman somewhere in Africa bore this child, made that baby a human being that would speak and think and walk, and then could be captured, kidnapped, and thrown into the traffic, the slave trade. So it was, I wanted to reinscribe the womb of woman within this story of capital, not only as some white feminists has talked about social reproduction in the home, but how the womb of non-white women has been exploited also for the reproduction of bonded bodies.
Well, I think that your book gets to the crux and the root of the matter. We say things and then they just fly off, but people don't dig deep enough to understand where it began and where it came from. And your work is just very excellent in that aspect.
Thank you. Yeah, because thinking of the fact that for 4 centuries, men and women who had been the children of someone, the woman who had cherished that child and made that child into a human being, were thrown into the slave trade, and that there was an exploitation of the womb of women. It was not just an exploitation of Africa,
right.
continent. It was also very concretely of the womb of women.
So let's talk about your curating experiences, which are very fabulous. You've worked as an independent curator. For example, you curated The Slave at the Louvre, An Invisible Humanity, which was to explore how slavery had contaminated Europeans' tastes, ways of living, consuming, receiving, and representation of themselves. Can you talk about why you wanted to organize this exhibition and share your experiences about curating?
Yeah, so it was, because when I was working on the question of slavery and slave trade in France, a lot of French people were telling me where our ancestors were neither slave trader nor slave owner. So it's very bad. We are very sorry, but it does not concern us. So I was really thinking how to tell them that it concerned them. And I thought through painting would be interesting, and through the Louvre, which is, the most famous museum in the world and the most visited museum, and very, of course, a pride of the French. And so for me, it was to look at when do you have the first painting that represent a man, a bourgeois man smoking a pipe? So when is tobacco entering the representation of the masculine self, of the white masculine self, as a form of representation, that part of the bourgeois masculinity, because tobacco has entered, it has become, has entered Europe. And where is tobacco coming from?
Right.
From slavery.
Right.
And so this different thing, or when do you start to see coffee pot, sugar bowl, teapot on the table? Because in the 16th century, you don't see them because you don't have coffee to serve, And so the way for me, it was like to trace the kind of thread that you may not, or your ancestor may not have been slave owners, might not have been slave owner or slave traders, but all the French ended consuming coffee, tobacco, sugar, chocolate, cotton, and so their life also became better. It entered also the social and cultural norms. You receive someone, you offer a cup of coffee with sugar, and then even the French pastry, which has become, like a sign of the French culture, were made possible because of sugar. Because before that, you were sweetening with honey. So so even that, that's so to say how slavery was not just something over there, but it penetrated deeply within the European fabric, social fabric. It transformed the way Europeans saw themselves, represented themselves, and also it organized their social life, their really intimate social life, with sweeten the coffee, the tobacco, the sugar, the chocolate, deeply transformed. So and their life became better. So this was a way for me to show that. And the second thing also, you have very few representation of the enslaved in European painting, except in the abolitionist iconography. But you find some beautiful painting of plantation. And so what you see is an exotic landscape. And you see some black in that exotic landscape. So the naturalization, the normalization, that it become a decor, that slavery is part of the landscape.
Right, so that's deep, yes.
The normalization of it, because you see the painting, and if you don't know the story, you just see Black people within a beautiful exotic landscape. Some painting made in Northeast Brazil in 17th century by a Dutch painter. So what you see palm tree, beautiful thing and so on. Beautiful landscape, and you see black. So it does not trigger in you the idea that you're looking at a plantation and what is a plantation. You see an exotic landscape.
Well, this is even a deeper analysis. There's become some awareness with an exhibit that traveled from New York to I think it's Museum d'Orsay, I may be wrong, but it was all about the Black model in these paintings. And so that has become, a big awareness with the Metropolitan Museum. And also it seems to have struck a nerve with the museum in France.
And yes, although French is always very slow, I must say. And Sherry, just because of that, for instance, if you don't know really well the history of slavery, there is a woman that she was painted a portrait of a Black woman, right? And so they found what they call her name. They found that in the archive. But I raised the question, is it really her name, or was it the name her owner gave her? Was it the name her mother gave her? Was it the name she was known among her peers? Or was it the name that the owner? So the name is not a name for the enslaved, as we know, right?
Right.
It's a name given. So I suggested that it should have been made as a question. She was called Madeleine, but is she Madeleine? We don't know if she Madeleine for herself and for her mother, Perhaps her mother gave her another name, and we will never know that. So this part also, even there, even in the Black model, was because of a certain ignorance, I will say, and an ignorance that nobody tried to,
Correct.
So you still have this reproduction of silencing.
Okay, so you're the co-founder and president of the Paris-based collective Decolonize the Arts, whose aim is to question and critique the art world's white frame structures and increasing disparity. Can you talk about Decolonize the Arts and how you want to help the art world improve and be fair?
Yeah, okay. So I'm no longer the president, but I am still a co-founder. Okay, so the thing was, a lot of things were happening in France, a lot of blackface, and which were justified, blackface is normal, and everyone at the head of museum, of cultural and artistic institution are men, white men, once in a while a white woman. So we raised the question of effectively who is at the head of this institution, who represent and who is represented, and also why is blackface, for instance, oh God, why do you get scandalized by that? It's just a joke, No, it's not a joke.
Right.
So this was the beginning, the question, and the fact that the cultural world and artistic world usually is seen as progressive, is seen.
Right.
The world of
the mask.
of radicalism, subversion, like they dare to go over the limit and things like that. And so it hides racism and sexism with it. It's really hide, sexism and that. So raising the question of racism and sexism and class, of course. And for me, for instance, I suggested that we see this cultural institution, artistic institution as a whole, so who is cleaning the place, So not just should we have more Black artists and Asian artists and Arab artists, right? No, is it who is cleaning the place? Who is guarding the place, right? So who is making it possible? So even so, the question of diversity was not, of course, it's better to have more, diverse artists being, represented and their work being shown. But also, if we want to really transform, to decolonize that, it's like who is cleaning, who is invisible, who is working in the office? Do we have sexual violence? Do we have promotion for the non-white people? How non-white people are treated? And so on and so forth. So to see it as a social structure, cultural, and the culture, as we say, of the museum, the brutality. The question also of the restitution of the object, of the African object, that European museum are full of objects stolen in Africa. So we contributed also to this question. And there was also 2 years ago, some Black actresses who published a book called Black is Not My Job.
Well, we've had couple of emails about this, and I'm sure you're still working this, but I'd like you to talk about the decolonization of self. And I've been using your little term with people as we come out of this pandemic and come out and we're in the midst of this political thing that we're in the US. But I tell people, you need to look at yourself. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, Cheryl, that's so important. That's so important because otherwise, even for instance, the way decolonization as a historical moment was seen, this is, for the colonized. And first I say it's also for the colonizing society. For instance, it's for also the French society. It's not just the job of colonized people, it's your job also, right? Because if you were a colonizer for so long, it penetrated your mentality, your art, your laws, your police, all your university, the way you teach. But I do think that effectively we do have to decolonize ourselves. The work we have to do is huge because so much has been put in our head, so much that we have learned to see like that, not like that. We have lost even our senses, to touch, to listen, to look, to smell, and so on. We have to re-educate. We have to unlearn so that we can learn again.
We have to be deprogrammed.
We have to unlearn. We have to deprogram. We have to ask ourselves every time, okay, where do I get this? Who put that in my mind, you know? And then be curious. Where is it coming from? You know what? You know, and so to be that curiosity is a very important tool for decolonization. To be curious about oneself, you know, to be curious about the world around me. You know, it's the world around me is not a mechanical world, right? It's not a machine, you know, in the sense of a mechanic. So it was made by human being, you know, who decided to exploit and dispossess and kill. So it can be done otherwise, you know. And so it is for me. It's how will we humanize the world, and so to that is how I was also I adopt some ways of being, or I can even, you know, the bad feeling I can have, how I overcome, you know, a jealousy, envy, you know, all these things, you know, the ego things. And we are not out of it because, you know, we are women, and of course we are not out of that. So if we really want to build some, you know, a humanity, we have really to learn also to work on ourselves constantly. It's a difficult work, and because we prefer to think it's because of the other.
Right, it's easier that way.
And of course, it's partly that, but it's not just that.
Right.
It's not just that, because the most difficult, in fact, you know, most of the leaders of anti-colonial struggle, whether they're women and men, they say the hard job will start, you know, tomorrow when we will be free. You know, the hard job starts. You know. You know.
Well, y'all, we have about a little bit time left for y'all. I want you to ask a question. Y'all is my intern from George Mason University, and she's from Shanghai. And y'all unmute yourself and ask Francois a question. And then we're gonna let you, we have about 6 minutes, and then we're gonna end this. Y'all.
Hi. You know, in China, the sex discrimination too. So, can you hear me?
Yes.
So, what do you think about this situation? Because I think I have nothing to do to change this. So
to change, sorry, there are moments that there are moments.
I mean, I have nothing to do to, you know, to change people's mind or do something. So, do you have some recommendation about this? Maybe in the future.
Okay, to change people's mind, right?
Yeah.
How do we change? Well, as I say, we start by, you know, like we could be, you know, have a group and ask a question like, how do we understand that things are made? You know, an opinion is being made. You know, like my point is like, how do we denaturalize, denormalize what appear normal? You know, racism has been normal, sexism has been made normal. In a way, you know, when I say normal, the idea of inferiority of Black people was, you know, has been, you know, like naturalized, you know, so we have to fight against that. So for me, it will be like to raise the mentality. For instance, when someone tells you something that person thinks that the way it is, that the way it has always been, you can ask the question, but how do you know that? On you know, on why do you think that way? You know, it comes to our mind like it's like, you know, like, oh, the day is coming, oh, the sun is rising, but no, that's not the same thing, you know. It's not the sun rising, you know. It's so where do you get that, you know? Who said that, you know? And even if you heard that, but and so what, you know? And what this person know, that one thing, and then encouraging learning, really. And we have to co-educate ourselves a lot. We have to educate ourselves a lot, and then we have to co-educate. And so when we do that, we may lose some friends because some friends will not like our question. They will find us, but that it's also, but we will win other. who will be, you know, the very good friend, the best friend we can have. It's always a collective work. But it can, when I say collective, we don't need to be 100. We can be just 5. You know, you can start very little, but it's very strong. And so that's really for me the collective work.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the curating things I do, it's always collective. So for instance, when I do work with artists, it's collective. So it's not like signing by what we do. It's not each artist signing. It's
Right.
a collective work. It's a short moment because I also understand that artists need to do, they have to deploy, you know, their own personal creativity. But for one short moment, we have also to work collectively and to forget our ego. You know, just so that how, for me, the question of transmission is very, very important. We have so many lies. We are surrounded.
Oh,
and
I know.
It's
I mean,
very
I teach art to little ones sometimes, and even like 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds. I don't have them sit there and draw a picture. I say, okay, we're going to do this together. I pull out a big sheet of paper. We're going to do a collage together. So get organized and start thinking and talk to each other. And they do it. And then it doesn't, and I've done with these little ones, I do things that take them 2 and 3 days. So people think that they couldn't do that. They get into it and they make it happen, and it's remarkable.
And usually people are very happy. It gives a sense, a very lot of happiness, and really to work collectively, because everything in this economy teaches us to be the individual, you know,
Right.
to earn for me, to get like 1,000 and 1,000 of like, you know, to be me.
And that's the problem.
And it's a problem because me, by myself, I won't survive. I need other. I need for myself. I don't need just because to be helped. But me with me is not very fascinating, you know. It's
I want to thank you for your time. It's an honor.
Thank you.
I look so forward to get through where we are and to meet you in person.
Oh, me too.
And I believe it's going to happen. I believe it. But I just want to thank you because the way that you think and your life's work is very important. And it's important for people to hear on this side for the exchange of ideas. So I just want to give my sincere thanks. And anything you want to tell us before we leave? We have 1 minute.
Well, you know, I'm very happy. And I do think also what you're doing, I mean, this connection are essential, really, to break also isolation. I mean, this conversation even, I mean, when we will meet, you know, concretely, that will be fantastic. But this conversation are really important. They bring us energy, you know, and joy.
All right, well, have a wonderful evening in Paris, and thank you so very much.